Hey everybody, welcome to the Mother FIGRs podcast. I'm Caitlin D'Arcangelo, founder and co-owner of Figure, Midwestern wife, and girl mom. I'm a dual certified pregnancy and postpartum trainer, majored in exercise science from the University of Michigan, earned my master in management degree from Duke University, and have been coaching in the fitness industry for over a decade. This podcast dives into all things pregnancy and postpartum fitness, especially in how to navigate strength and intensity training in these seasons. Whether you're in it yourself, trying to get pregnant, or coaching this population, you're in the right place. I'm excited to share personal experiences, client stories, guest interviews, and evidence-based strategies to give you the guidance, insights, and clarity needed to navigate these seasons with confidence. And with that, let's get rolling. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Mother FIGRs podcast. Today we have a very fun topic, and it's one that I have been asked multiple times. And within the last month, I've had both a doula and a chiropractor specifically ask me this question. And then this week, I also came across a viral reel that was touching on this topic with the comment section going off about it. So I was like, this is a perfect time to make this podcast episode. And it revolves around this thought or concept that does being fitter or lifting heavy make you have a worse labor? And so the doulas that I talked to, her exact question or comment was, something I have noticed a lot in my work is that moms that work out heavy in pregnancy often have really long pushing stages or cesareans because their pelvic floor is so tight. So many women focus on strengthening the pelvic floor and not learning how to rest and relax it. So having a podcast about how to support pelvic floor health during pregnancy and working out to optimize it for birth would be really awesome. So that is what we are going to talk about today. I wanted to frame this up first. There's a lot to decode and cover here. But first, this is something that I have seen multiple times on social media, especially. And I wanted to just have this caveat or lead in of when you see posts on Instagram, especially from influencers or moms or those who are not professionals or researchers or in this space, you have to remember that it is just that. It is their personal experience. So the Instagram reel that I saw, it was a clip of her lifting in the gym. She's I was told that lifting would make my labor better. And then it flips to her having a 32-hour labor or something crazy. And Instagram was literally made for people to share their personal experience. So there's nothing wrong with her sharing what happened to her or what her experience was. That's her choice and her page, and everybody can do what they want on their own page. The problem comes when they either use their N=1 situation and applies it to the whole population. And then when you get people in the comment section being oh, that happened to me too. Then when you as a consumer go and see that, a lot of times you will then be stuck with this notion of oh, lifting heavy equals long labor, so I will not lift heavy. Whereas these are all personal experiences. It has happened. It can happen. But just because one person's experience with lifting has an X causes Y in this situation. So in this case, lifting heavy causes long labor or stalls or C-section or excess tearing or whatever it is. Just know that, everybody's experience is different. And that is something I wanted to just start with for today because it does happen. It can happen. I have a research paper with me right now that I'll kind of go into some of the things that research is finding. But a lot of times research and what's actually happening in real life is not apples to apples, especially in the pregnancy and postpartum space right now, because there is a big lack of research, and research especially when it comes to higher intensity activities like heavy lifting. So there's a lot of variables that go into this. taking that situation, so personal experience, you can share it, you can see it, you can read it, you can see other people's like experience with it, but it does not necessarily mean that that's going to happen to you. This paper that I pulled, it is called, and I'll drop this in the show notes too, The Impact of Physical Activity During Pregnancy on Labor and Delivery. And this was posted in 2021 by a group of researchers. And this study and many others, they kind of highlight a bunch of other studies that have looked at similar things. What they found from a research angle is that the higher levels of physical activity, and that included things like weightlifting, aerobics, there was a lot of different activities included in this. So heavy lifting is part of it, but not the whole focus of the study. They found that the active stage of labor, so active stage of labor is in the first stage of labor when it's 6 centimeters to 10 centimeters dilated. So there's early phase of early phase of the first stage of labor is like 0 to 6 centimeters. The active phase, oh my goodness, of the first stage of labor is the 6 to 10 centimeters. And then the second stage of labor, and then there's transition also within the first stage. And then second stage of labor is the pushing phase. So there's first stage, second stage, but the first stage is broken up into 3 different phases: early, active, and transition. There we go. Got my words right. So what this study found, they had 811 moms. So that it was a really large study. What they found is that those who had higher physical activity levels had a significantly shorter active stage of labor. So going from 6 centimeters to 10 centimeters by multiple hours. So it was 5.7 plus or minus 5 versus 7.4 plus or minus 6 hours. So take that how you will. And then on top of that, they also found that higher activity levels were less likely to have a prolonged first stage of labor overall. So the time of your first contraction to the time of transition until you start pushing, they found that those with low or higher activity levels had were less likely to prolong that first stage of labor. So 9.8% versus 19%. So what research has found is that physical activity helps in this study, for instance, or for example, exercise can help shorten active labor and the first stage of labor overall. What this study found also was that there was not a big difference in the second stage of labor, so pushing phase. They did not find a big difference between cesarean delivery, operative vaginal delivery, perineal tearing, or postpartum hemorrhaging. And so again, this is this specific study. They also quote multiple different studies that have shown opposite. And I wanted to just highlight what research is showing right now because there is a lot of variability. One, because they track activity differently. So some are only aerobic-based studies. Some are only like activities of daily living or like yoga, gardening, those kind of things. Like we're still not really into the phase of like high weights. But this was one of the sooner or like more recent studies that did include heavy lifting. So I just wanted to throw kind of what research is saying into this podcast to give us a little bit more of a framework. So what they found and what has been noted is that physical activity is associated with shorter duration of the active stage and reduced likelihood of a prolonged first stage with not a ton of difference in the pushing phase. So I just wanted to highlight that. Even so, I guess let me go into a few different things in here too, because it goes into, this kind of gets me a little bit off topic, but still on the same topic of why and like what's actually going on. So one of their thoughts is that higher activity actually helps uterine contractility. So they did in a separate paper, they found that higher activity rates increases the ability of your uterine to contract. So when it comes to labor, those who are more trained have, stronger uterine contractions, which is super interesting. They've also found that exercise increases oxytocin naturally. So when you go into labor, there is generally a decreased need for oxytocin, so like epidural and that kind of stuff, which has been supported by other research. So there's a less need for epidurals or like oxytocin or like hormonal based pain medication or pain relief, which can help with pushing as well sometimes when you can actually like feel what's happening in your body and go with that. So super interesting there. And then it goes into the whole pelvic floor piece of it, which is what I want to dive into today. So I wanted to highlight what they say in the paper, and because they also quote like multiple other different studies. So I thought it was interesting. This is in the discussion piece of this paper. First, they note that it's the diaphragm that contracts that then increases the pressure in your intrauterine, cavity essentially. And that is what helps the head kind of come down into the pelvis and out through the pelvic floor. So when we have this like maximum contraction of the diaphragm at the top, so the diaphragm is the muscle that like kind of lines the bottom of your rib cage, that is going to contract and descend and push pressure down into this intrauterine, oh my goodness, whatever, the core canister essentially. And it's going to increase intrauterine pressure, and then that's going to push baby down. What happens is when we have a pelvic floor at the bottom of this core canister that has what they call a lack of elasticity or increased muscle stiffening, or it's not able to relax and lengthen and get out of the way, this is going to increase the force required to get the baby out because there's something at the bottom that's blocking the system essentially. So from a diaphragm perspective, diaphragm contracts, descends, pushes baby down. But if there's a wall at the bottom of that, which is your pelvic floor, if the pelvic floor is too stiff, that's going to increase the amount of force that the diaphragm and the uterus have to keep pushing down to get that baby out. And that can impede the second stage of labor or that pushing phase. They also note that they have used, it's called shear wave elastography. Don't quote me on that one. I'm not a researcher. But it's something that measures the elastic properties of the pelvic floor muscles. And they've actually used that as a risk assessment tool to predict how severe your tearing will be. So there is this correlation of like how elastic your pelvic floor is and the restriction that's going to happen from the tightness of that during labor that could potentially cause tearing afterwards. So I'm going to read just like straight up this sentence because then I'll dive into it. But it says, using this information, experts propose that athletes are more likely to have rigid pelvic floor muscles that may prolong the second stage of labor, and argue that pelvic floor muscle training may in fact decrease the elasticity or increase the stiffness of these key muscles. For this reason, studies have concluded that the role of pelvic floor muscle exercises during pregnancy is not supported by scientific evidence. Therefore, it is plausible that high levels of physical activity during pregnancy may not affect or potentially worsen the elasticity of pelvic floor muscles that facilitate a shorter second stage of labor. So wrapping that all up, pretty much they're saying that athletes are more likely to have rigid pelvic floor muscles. And when you have rigid pelvic floor muscles that can't move out of the way, that can prolong the second stage of labor or that pushing phase. And so that in that sense, it's not advantageous. It's either doesn't have an effect or might have a negative effect to have pelvic floor muscle exercises during pregnancy. So wrapping all that together, I wanted to also now bring in the Kegel. So when people think of what pelvic floor muscle exercises are, it's generally about simply the muscle engagement of the pelvic floor, which is a Kegel. So Kegel is literally when you contract the pelvic floor, you kind of do that drawing up and in. Some people have heard it as like picking up a blueberry with your vagina or like squeezing and sucking up and in. There's 100 different ways you might have heard it. The problem with I have never personally prescribed a Kegel in my 5 years of coaching this population exclusively. And that is because the Kegel is fantastic for the contraction part of a pelvic floor muscle contraction. However, the pelvic floor needs to be able to relax also. So if we're just constantly squeezing and engaging the muscle, we're never actually allowing it to relax and go through its full range of motion, just like we would any other muscle group. So just imagine that you are a fitness trainer and you're telling somebody to do just the top half of a bicep curl, just all the time. 20 times a day, 30 times a day, 4 sets of 20, 7 times a day. I've heard the most ridiculous time, like, I don't know, 100 Kegels a day. I don't even know. But just imagine like telling somebody to only do the top half of a bicep curl just constantly and never instructing them to then lengthen the arm all the way out and then come all the way back in. That muscle, that bicep in this scenario is going to get super tight and it's going to fatigue out and it's not going to be able to do its job because it's so overactive. And that's what's happening a lot of times in these pregnant athletes if they don't have specific pregnancy programming. So when you have a super tight pelvic floor, or like if you're constantly lifting heavy, you're always trying to have this like max contraction or max like core engagement so you can lift the heavy weights. It's part of what is, it's good to have a strong pelvic floor when you're lifting weights. You need to have that like the Valsalva breath, and like there's 100 different like core engagement pieces that go into it. That's not part of this episode. But a lot of times when we're focusing so much on just the heavy lifting and not really considering what's happening to the pelvic floor, yes, heavy lifting can cause one to have a more stiff, tighter pelvic floor that is unable to relax. So what this whole episode really comes down to is pelvic floor down training. And I also want to note before we get deeper into things too, is heavy lifting is not the only, or those who lift heavy are not the only ones who need down training. Literally every mom probably does, because it's a lot of things like daily tendencies or daily habits, tension, holding, stress. These things can have an impact on the tightness of your pelvic floor, because our pelvic floor is like our deepest layer of stability. So a lot of times, like our body, when we are tense, we will be subconsciously like clenching the pelvic floor all the time. So this is not an episode just for those who lift heavy, but it's really for everybody to have a functional pelvic floor and be able to down train the pelvic floor in hopes for a more functional pelvic floor, which will then help with labor. So we're going to talk about tight pelvic floors in general and how we can get a functional one, which is what we're really looking for, versus a lot of times we are told that we need a strong pelvic floor to push the baby out, where that's not the case. So one of the main functions of the pelvic floor is to control the holes, like what I like to say. So there's like a sphincteric property of the pelvic floor where it has like the muscle kind of wraps around the urethra, the vagina, and the anus. And when the pelvic floor is like, we want it to contract, we want things to be held in. And when we relax the pelvic floor, it allows things to come out. So on a daily basis, and this is part of the reason why pelvic floor health is so important, because those three pieces of our body have so many daily activities of daily living, or like very personal properties to it. And so when there's dysfunction in any three of those areas, like it can cause a lot of havoc. So that's why pelvic floor health is just good in general. But we want to be able to keep things in, which is what we talk about a lot when it comes to like symptoms during pregnancy, and especially return to fitness postpartum when there is a lack of muscle tension from after birth. So a lot of the focus, I think that's why a lot of the focus becomes pelvic floor strengthening, because when we are like leaking or have prolapse or have, different pains and things, sometimes it can be from like a weakness of the pelvic floor. However, most of those symptoms are also from too tight of a pelvic floor, which goes back to this episode, which is why down training the pelvic floor muscles is so important. So yes, we do want a strong pelvic floor, but we also need that pelvic floor to be able to relax and get out of the way, which is one of the basics of labor. So when it comes to labor, we actually need the pelvic floor to move out of the way aka lengthen and release tension so baby can come out, so the diaphragm from the top can put pressure into the core canister so that the uterus can contract and everything from above pushes it out. So the pelvic floor actually has no pushing properties. We want that to get out of the way so everything else can help get that baby to get out of your body. So what can happen when we have that tight pelvic floor, like I mentioned earlier, is that when it's unable to relax, the diaphragm is contracting and the uterus is contracting. And when it's pushing against that stiff pelvic floor muscle, it can increase that force for delivery, which can impede that second stage, like the paper was saying. So again, we want it to be functional. This is the missing piece from the concept of like, oh, I'll just like do what I've always done. Or I'll just like go to my classes and just modify where I need to. Pretty much the difference between like modifying normal workouts for pregnancy versus doing pregnancy specific training, which is something that I harp on all the time. I don't have a pregnancy program for nothing. There is something so specific about pregnancy training. Yes, you can do a lot of the same movements. You can still lift heavy. There's so much fitness to be held onto and strength to be held onto, but we have to be including things like these pelvic floor down training principles that I'm going to talk about here in a second to hopefully get your body to be able to relax the pelvic floor and just have this like focus on the pelvic floor and core throughout this season. So my figure pregnancy program is very specific to pregnancy, but it's for those who love to strength train and hit metcons and kind of go into that more functional fitness realm, because yes, we can do a lot of awesome things. And yes, at the same time, we also should be doing pregnancy specific training to help that pelvic floor for labor purposes. So the rest of this episode, that was kind of my layup for down training and what you can do, or you can coach your clients to do that can help release tension in the pelvic floor, learn to connect with the pelvic floor, learn to lengthen it to hopefully aid in labor. So these are 6 different things that are in my Figure Pregnancy app program that I specifically structure or program in to help aid in labor and actually focus on releasing the pelvic floor so that we don't have this prolonged second stage of labor. Again, there's no way to guarantee anything. There's no one movement that can help guarantee any outcome. We have seen from this study and from others that exercise can already help improve labor times. But hopefully a lot of these things can also start aiding in more active athletes and moms not having that tight pelvic floor issue that can potentially increase the second stage of labor, tearing, C-section delivery, all that stuff. So number one, all my figure pregnancy workouts in the third trimester start with breath work to start each workout. And the focus is on the inhales. So I have a whole core lab also within the app that teaches you the breath work piece of it, or the how to do stuff, which is like the more important piece of actually compared to what you're doing is how to do it. So breath work, when we're allowing that belly to relax, the breathing into the back, breathing into the lats, letting that pelvic floor release on those inhales, that is the down training piece that I start every workout in the third trimester with, which is super important because then that's like kind of keeps your focus or starts your focus for the day on down training and just focusing on the pelvic floor and not just keeping it clenched the whole time. It's a video of me doing breath work with you. And again, our focus is on inhales. We're also going to do the exhales, so that pelvic floor contraction, that core contraction, engagement on those exhales. But I do a really big focus on the inhales or the relaxing piece of it. Another piece that kind of goes into this whole episode, when you are inhaling, I like to think of it as like creating like potential energy almost, or like think of like a rubber band. When you're stretching it, lengthening it, it's giving that rubber band the energy to then snap back and have a really strong snap, essentially. So when we are inhaling and we focus a lot of our efforts on that big inhale, so expansion, that contraction or that engagement of the muscles following the inhales can become stronger and more effective. And you have kind of like this bigger range of motion that the muscles actually go through to create that snapback per se, or that muscle engagement. So when we focus more so on the inhale than we do on the exhale, we actually get stronger engagement, stronger muscle contractions on the exhales, or just like stronger muscle engagement in general. Going back to that bicep thought, if we just are kind of like going through this small range of motion, so mini inhales, mini exhales, if you think about that in terms of like your bicep, we're not able to squeeze or get a huge muscle contraction when the muscle is already kind of right there. It's only halfway, versus when you fully lengthen your arm and then fully contract, that gives you a lot stronger of a muscle contraction or a bicep curl than you would if you were only going in this half range of motion. So that's what inhales are doing with breath work. It's allowing your muscle to expand and lengthen all the way so that contract even harder. So when I tell clients this or put it in that perspective, they're like, oh, that makes sense, versus like, what's the point of an inhale? Why can I keep just like engaging the muscle? It's actually giving you that energy or that potential to get a stronger muscle contraction. So side caveat, that was all number one, breath work to start each workout. Number two that I program within my figure pregnancy workout to help you with down training the pelvic floor is strength supersets with a pelvic floor relaxation move as the second movement. For instance, I'll have barbell deadlifts. So like, let's say 8 reps of a barbell deadlift. Go ham, whatever weight you want to do with good form, breath work, timing, core engagement, all the basics, however heavy you want to go, I don't care. We're going to superset that with something like an adductor rock back or a child's pose, or something where you're focusing on relaxing that pelvic floor, getting some tension release out of it before going back into those deadlifts. So that's going to help the pelvic floor not be overactive and just like continue clenching super heavy throughout all 3, 4, 5 sets of your deadlifts or whatever it is. It's going to allow you to focus on that pelvic floor. And like, so when you go back to the deadlifts, you're like, oh yeah, I got to, inhale on the way down, exhale on the way up. And it doesn't have to be super specific to breath, but it can help with pelvic floor tension. And then it also like physically gets that pelvic floor in a lengthened position. So adductor rock backs, you're kneeling on one side and then the opposite side or opposite leg is out to the side, and you're like sitting back onto the heel and coming back up. So it's stretching out that inner thigh, lengthening that tailbone, or like giving space to the tailbone, lengthening out that glute a little bit, so that you can be more effective in your deadlifts. So I like to do this a lot in my circuits, in my strength supersets, and pretty much, every workout in figure pregnancy. Not every workout, but a lot of them, where you are supersetting a pelvic floor lengthening movement with a heavy strength movement, so that we're not just going ham on the strength, we're also thinking about the pelvic floor. Number 3 is I include labor prep circuits a few times a week in the 3rd trimester. And these include movements that get the hips in different angles or different positions. And when you open up the hips in different ways or move the hips in different ways, it puts the pelvic floor or moves the pelvic floor in different ways. And it also opens up different parts of the pelvis, which help with different stages of labor. So when you externally rotate the hips, so think of like a low squat hold where you're like putting your knees outwards, that's opening up the top of your pelvis or the pelvis inlet where your baby starts and, kind of gets started into labor. And so we have a lot of movements that are externally rotating your knees so we can open up the top of the pelvis so baby can start descending. Then there's the mid pelvis, so obviously the middle of the pelvis. And when you do asymmetrical work, that helps shift the mid pelvis. Again, these are all like very minor movements. Like you're not totally shifting the middle of the pelvis, but it's enough to release tension and get the hips moving enough. So things like lunges, step ups, hip shifts, things like that, pigeons, anything where like the two sides of your body are doing different things, that can help shift and open up the mid pelvis, which can help with kind of like that active stage of labor, getting the baby further down into the pelvis. And then there's the internally rotated movement. So thinking of putting your knees closer to each other or like bringing your knees into touch, that is helping open the pelvic outlet, which helps baby come out for the pushing phase. So what we can learn from that is, one, there is not one main move for labor prep. We want different movements that can help open up different parts of the pelvis, that can help move the pelvic floor in different ways. And number two, they're all equally important for different stages of labor. So a lot of what I like to get going in the earlier part of, I guess, all of the third trimester is focusing on externally rotating so that we can help get the baby started and get labor started naturally. But then also training your pelvis to be able to shift side to side for that mid pelvis and be able to rotate those knees in for the outlet for pushing phase. So there's a lot of different pieces going on there, but in general, the labor prep circuits that I program helps with all these different things. And those all can help get tension release in the pelvic floor because we're shifting the pelvic we're shifting the hips in a way that allows the pelvic floor to kind of move dynamically with it, which is going back to that functionality of the pelvic floor, not the strength of it. Number 4 are stretches. So trimester specific stretches I have throughout the whole program. All of them throughout first, second, and third trimester. I have an emphasis on, again, focusing on inhales and releasing tension and letting your body actually relax into the stretch versus being passive in these stretches or just like tensing and holding on to more tension while you're holding. Because that's what a lot of us tend to do is like when you're in a pigeon pose or like a wide forward fold, you're just like tensing up because it's like so straining or it feels straining. What I like to coach instead is like to really use breath work while we're holding these static stretches to allow for tension to relax, not just through our pelvic floor, but through our whole body, which has this mobility factor to it, which is great. But again, really using breath work, pelvic floor relaxation while we're holding static stretches to, again, help with that down training, to help the pelvic floor not be so stiff for labor. Number 5 is a low squat hold progression. And this is my personal favorite movement. I talk about this a little bit in my labor and delivery story with Amelia. I think that was my last episode last week. So go back to that if you would like. But this is one that I have a progression for to hold up to 10 minutes. And there's a few reasons that I love this one. First, it's kind of helping with the beginning stages of labor. So it's that externally rotated position. So your low squat hold, your feet are planted, your knees are wide, and you're just holding a super low, just like kind of hanging out down there. You can hold on to like a rig or a pole or a table if you need some support, but trying to get as low into that squat as you can. This helps first externally rotate the knees so that we are opening up that pelvic inlet, and that's going to help baby start getting in like a good position within the pelvis. It's going to help your baby start engaging with the cervix, which is what opens up. So that's the thing that dilates that you want to get bigger for labor or wider. It also helps with pelvic floor control. So we want like a proper amount of pressure to be pushing down into that pelvic floor. And when we have our baby plus that like really vulnerable deep squat that is opening up the pelvic floor, like purposely lengthening it, we want to be able to like consciously relax the pelvic floor and feel that healthy amount of pressure downwards. And then also be able to slightly engage it so we can control those muscles. And so we're not like leaking or having too much pressure or pain. So it's really good for pelvic floor control. And we should be feeling kind of like a slight strain or a slight stretch on the pelvic floor, which is going to help get those muscles ready for tearing purposes. Again, I talk about this in my other episode. I'm going to talk about it here for a second, but I want you to note that this is, again, my personal experience. So this does not mean that this is truth or will happen to you. But when I went into labor, I had no tearing. I had 2 to 3 hours of like actual labor pains. And when I went to my 4-week appointment, my my 39-week appointment, I was already 4 centimeters dilated without feeling a single thing. And I truly believe that a lot of that low squat hold pressure down and like allowing my pelvic floor and allowing the baby to, which was Amelia, to kind of like get into proper position and to start engaging with the cervix prior to labor starting, that helped a lot with all these things, getting her in good position, engaging with the cervix, pelvic floor control. And then it also helps, I think, with not tearing, because I had already been putting a proper amount of pressure down there and starting to stretch that perennial area. And so that's what the hope is. That's what like stacking the deck in your favor with this movement is. It cannot guarantee that will happen for me in my next delivery. That's going to happen in 5 weeks from now. Or can't guarantee anything for you, but that is kind of the concept behind it. And that's the hope, or what we want to stack the deck in your favor for with low squat holds. So that is also included in my programming. And then number 6, I already talked on a little bit, is my core lab. So this is an 8 video module series where I walk you through breath work, pelvic floor relaxation, pelvic floor contractions, core engagement, in a bunch of different movements. It's literally like 10-minute videos of me guiding you through different stuff, and that can help you apply to your strength training in your workouts overall. So it's specific core pelvic floor stuff, but it's also like how should you be looking through the framework or the mindset of pelvic floor control and pelvic floor function during traditional strength training. And that can help with your workouts in general, not just with like specific movements for the pelvic floor, which daily activities and, your whole workout all play into pelvic floor function, which also leads to a kind of a 7th one, is just like what you're doing in your day-to-day life. Like, so as you're sitting here listening to this podcast, like physically relax your pelvic floor, inhale into your pelvic floor, and just see how tight it is. Like, are you clenched and you don't even know it? Maybe you're doing good and you don't feel any, when you go to engage it, you're able to engage super well. When you want to relax it, you can relax super well. So again, it goes back to that functionality of like just everyday activities. Your pelvic floor should constantly be inhaling, exhaling, or lengthening, contracting. We don't just want this strong pelvic floor, which is what got the bad rep and still can happen. Like, we still don't have enough research to say that it's not a fact. But with athletes or high level lifters, or just like women who lift generally. But that's kind of where the topic goes, is it's not necessarily heavy lifting, or I guess like kind of this whole episode in a nutshell, really, is that you can be strong, you can lift heavy, you can do whatever activity is you love to do. We just also should be putting the work in for pelvic floor down training, learning how to build a functional pelvic floor, not just a strong pelvic floor, and building that into our workouts and into our everyday life, so we can hopefully have the labor and delivery that we want, that is uncomplicated and smooth and has the least amount of, postpartum stuff going on. So that's kind of where the mindset should be. It's not so much like, oh, we shouldn't lift during pregnancy because it could make a tighter pelvic floor. It's like, no, you still can lift heavy during pregnancy. Let's just also throw in some down training and make sure to be focused in that area as well. So I will link my figure pregnancy program in the show notes, as well as this specific study that I had pulled up. So if you want to dive into that a little bit more, you can do that. And then also, obviously, I'm available to you guys at any time if you want to message me on Instagram or shoot me an email. This is a really fun topic to kind of dive into, but hopefully that goes through all of that in a big roundabout way. And with that, I will see you guys in the next episode. Thanks for tuning in to the Mother FIGRs podcast. If these episodes help or resonate with you in any way, it would be so helpful to the show if you could leave a review so we can get this into more moms' hands. And if you're looking for even more guidance and direction when it comes to pregnancy and postpartum fitness, I got you covered. My Mother FIGRs app subscription includes my figure pregnancy and figure postpartum workout programs, in addition to our general fitness programs. You'll get the day-by-day workouts you need to help you feel strong, pain-free, and labor-ready during pregnancy, and also the recovery, strength, and progressions you'll need to get back to the activities you love, full of strength and without symptoms after baby arrives. If you're local to the Brighton, Michigan area, I also host daily women's functional fitness classes, a 6-week postpartum return to fitness course, and pregnancy and postpartum consultation sessions. For those who are providers, coaches, or practitioners in the space, I hold a live Mother FIGRs certification course that equips you with the knowledge, tools, and confidence to train and work with this population. For information on all of these services and programs, make sure to check out fitisgettingreal.com/moms or head to the show notes for the direct link. I'm so thankful that you tuned in to today's episode, and I will catch you next time.